The scripture for today is Psalm 19, 1 through 6. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech, they use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. In the heavens God has pitched a tent for the sun. It is like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, like a champion rejoicing to run his course. It rises at one end of the heavens and makes its circuit to the other. Nothing is deprived of its warmth.
It was over 20 years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. Probably because of the wonderful company I was with. Paul and I were returning from attending a play, the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Yeah. We were driving along in silent solitude, just thinking, below the star-lit sky. Paul was half asleep, the radio was even silent, and all of a sudden I saw it. A momentary flicker across the sky as a star went shooting across. It was only the 5th or 6th time I'd ever seen one. And it was gone, there and gone so fast, I wondered if I'd even seen it at all. And I began to wonder, why? Why do we have shooting stars? Now, don't start to explain to me that it's a meteor or space trash or something like that burning through the atmosphere. I know all that. But why? What is the purpose of this magnificent, although momentary, display that we see? You know, with science, we're always explaining why. And I think in doing that, sometimes we've lost the magnificent ability to wonder as we view the extraordinary or even see the extraordinary in the ordinary. Too often we are instructed as to the answers and simply move on. Mary Budd Rowe once wrote an article in the Reader's Digest, and it was entitled, "Teaching Your Child to Wonder." And she said it was a strange sight, and I'm quoting her. A man standing before a fountain, watching the falling water, tilting his head from side to side. But she said, as she drew closer to him, she saw that he was rapidly moving his fingers up and down in front of his face. And as she got beside him for several minutes, he continued to silently do that. And then he turned to her and asked, "Can you do it? Can you see the individual drops?" And she said, "I copied him, spreading my fingers and moving them up and down before my eyes, and suddenly the fountain stream seemed to freeze into individual droplets. For some time, the two of us stood there, perfecting our strobe technique. And then as the professor turned to leave, he looked me in the eye and he said, 'Never, never forget that science is just that kind of exploring and fun.'" That man was Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein understood things that most of us will never know. But yet, he had the time to sit there and move his fingers and to watch the droplets of the water and just wonder about it all. That article goes on to explain that people need to teach your children to wonder, to enjoy science, nature, and life, to get beyond the simple facts and learn to appreciate what we learn. We as God's children need to learn to wonder at the glory that is our Heavenly Father's. Have you ever considered all the things there are to wonder about? Let me give you some examples this morning. For example, there's a lot of scriptural things. You remember the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that we discovered when we were doing the Daniel series? Remember that? First, there are the simple facts. They were thrown into a fiery furnace. A great furnace that was so hot that it killed the people that threw them in. There they were apparently met by an angel. And they simply walked around. And when they came out, they didn't smell like smoke or like fire. Even Nebuchadnezzar understood the wonder of it all. In verse 24 of Daniel 3 says, Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded and stood up in haste. When I read this story, I begin to wonder things like, what must it have been like walking around in that middle of the fire, so hot that it killed the people that put you there, just walking around across those hot coals, not getting burned, not feeling the heat, not sweating, just walking around and enjoying yourself, joined by an angel of God. What would that have been like to have been met there by that angel, there in the furnace? Or even it would have been fun to watch the people outside with their mouths open. What's happening? You see, to know the simple story isn't enough. We need to be challenged to think about it and to wonder about it. I think one of the reasons mankind has lost a sense of God is because we no longer wonder about Him and His ways. We can't really meditate because we have nothing to wonder about and to meditate on. Another story in Daniel that you remember from was the story of the lion's den. Daniel and the lion's den. Remember that? You know, we read modern stories of people being mauled by lions all the time. In certain zoos and circuses. Just the other day, I saw the story of a woman being pulled, or that she was pulled by an alligator into shark-infested waters and was lucky enough to survive. The other day, just this last, I think it was yesterday, or maybe it was Friday, they had a jaguar got loose, and I think it was at the New Orleans zoo. Killed 7 or 8 other animals before they collared it, and the danger that was there. But one of the things that I always noticed is I like to go and watch in that little Columbia Zoo that they used to have in Lafayette, Indiana. They had 3 or 4 lions. And I used to go and love to go watch them because they are such magnificent creatures to watch. But I remember that it wasn't near as much fun after Viv was born. And I'd noticed it before. The reason it wasn't near as much fun is because if you watch those lions, anytime a child came in, small child came in to the area, those lions would pace watching that child. You know why? They're thinking food. That's what they're thinking, food. And, you know, when I know that and it's my child sitting there, it's uncomfortable. You know, you begin to wonder now, is this zoo really safe? Is the bars strong enough if one of these animals would want to get out? And here we have Daniel in this story cast into a den of lions. You know what those den of lions were for? They were fed by the enemies of the state. They didn't like you, they threw you in. And that's what the animals ate. And so here they take Daniel, they throw him in. And what happens? Absolutely nothing. Probably if you're there, you'd watch Daniel down there petting the kitties. And you have to wonder about that. I have a feeling that night that Daniel got more sleep than Darius. I just bet Daniel slept better than Darius. And he slept with the lions. And he survived. It's a lot to think about. What would it have been like sleeping with a lion? You ever seen one of those magnificent creatures? You know, you'd like to pet them, but they're just so full of power as they pace. What must it have been like sleeping with them? I am amazed at Daniel's faith. That he'd go ahead and did what he was doing in front of God, knowing and trusting that God would take care of him. If something would happen and he would get caught and he would get thrown to the lions. His faith is just something you can't hardly believe. but so is Darius' faith. Darius came the next morning, I think, worried, but anticipating seeing Daniel. Because he knew Daniel's God was with him. Think about Simon Peter for a minute. He goes fishing in Luke 5, 4 through 8 is most of the story. They had been fishing all night. And to me, it's even a wonder that they would go back out so that Jesus could teach from the ship in the first part of the chapter. And sometimes the facts cause us to wonder more. Night fishing that was done on the Sea of Galilee was for a specific fish. And it was for a fish that lived in the depths. But at night it would come shoreward to feed. I don't know what they were eating, but that's how they worked. Every fisherman knew it. You know, you didn't go fishing and casting out nets in the shallow waters when there's not going to be any fish there because it's daylight and the fish have all went back to the deep. A bright fisherman knows, where you fish. They would fish by using 100-foot nets, tying them together to make lakes up to 300 and 400 foot. They would sail out into the sea, tie them to shore, sail out into the sea, dropping the weighted nets as they went, and then they would sail back, picking up the nets, trapping the fish inside. And it had to be done at night because that's when the fish were going to be there. Anybody knows if you can find fish where they're spawning, like crappie or bluegill, boy, you can catch them until you get tired from picking them in the boat. Because they're spawning in that area, they're that area. So that's the area you want to find to fish. But it had to be done at night. Peter full well knew that the fish had already returned to the deep. It would be a little bit like trying to fish for trout in a warm water lake. Anybody that's ever trout fished, you don't go to a warm water lake to fish for trout. It would be like trying to fish for sharks in Bell Lake up here. It just doesn't make sense. You don't do things like that. And Peter knew that. And so there's a lot to wonder about here. Why did Peter agree to cast out the nets, put them down again when Jesus told him to, knowing full well that the fish were gone? They had went back to the deep. I can imagine the scorn of the other fishermen as Peter says, he didn't say it, he starts putting his nets out. Peter, what do you think you're doing? If you weren't insane, you're wasting your time. You're wasting your energy. Why did Peter agree to it? And second of all, we wonder what in the world were those fish doing there? They weren't supposed to be there. And they normally wouldn't be there. Everybody was amazed. Probably not only by the size of the catch, but that there was any catch at all. Peter's reaction in verse 8 illustrates the amazing part about this situation. It says, "But when Simon Peter saw that, he fell down at Jesus' feet, saying, 'Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord.'" Peter was just so astounded that he knew that there was something about Jesus that he couldn't understand even and contemplate. Let's go on to another area. What about nature? Ever wonder about nature? I think of that shooting star. Why did it happen? Why did I see it? Why was it that moment when I happened to glance up at that specific spot that I saw that star? I wondered sometimes how many others shared that special sight and saw that star flash by like I did. How many shared that moment with me? What does it mean? Several weeks ago I talked about Linda calling and waking us up one night to see the northern lights. When a pastor gets a call in the middle of the night, it's not usually good. But that was wonderful. It really was. Those brilliant displays, you look at them and you wonder why. I know what they are. I know the scientific fact. But why did God create such a thing? What's its purpose? Why does it happen? You know, we're told about the purpose of the rainbow, and I still wonder with enjoyment every time I see one. How many of you, every time there's a rain and the sun comes out, you're running out looking to see if there's a rainbow? Because you love to see them and wonder about them. But we aren't told what the purpose of the northern lights are. But I've reached a conclusion in my mind, as I wonder about them, that it's nothing more than God rewarding us for living in a cold climate. God's rewarding us for being faithful. He's painting us a display that I don't care who the artist is, you can never capture the full essence of the northern lights. It's a cause for sharing, like Linda did that night, for us to enjoy too. I think about the thunder and lightning. I know the facts, which are a cause for amazement itself when you stop and think about it. That electrical charges are building up in the earth and in heaven and the clouds, and then it flashes across to equalize the electrons. I know all that stuff. But the fire, and the fire of that flash creates a vacuum in the air that rushes back and causes the thunder. At least that's what I understand. I know by calculating the speed of light and the speed of sound and measuring the distance between the flash of lightning and hearing the thunder, that you can actually tell exactly how far away it is. But science can never explain the wonder of it all. The frightening beauty of the magnificent displays. I remember one time traveling from Kozad, Nebraska back to Holbrook. And it was what Dad called it, a flash lightning, but the whole sky would light up, and you never really heard the thunder too much. And that whole trip, we just sat and watched in amazement as the light, God would keep lighting up the sky for us, lighting up the sky for us. We could see the clouds moving when the sky would light up. And we just had so much fun watching all that and wondering about it. There is the frightening beauty, though, in those displays, too, because sometimes when you hear that crack, it seems like right next door, and you know a tree may have been hit and maybe coming down. It can be frightening also. And you begin to feel the sense of smallness and helplessness that can help us to wonder about how God loves us. Him being so powerful, controlling all that, and us just peons down here, I guess, on earth. You know, I wonder about how a boy in a cabin can have the electricity hit the eaves, run down a power line, jump across to the bed, go through the young man, lifting him up off the bed, and then bouncing down the other side and to ground, and him walking away from it. Goes and tells his stepdad, and his stepdad says, "Oh, you're just dreaming it, forget it." And he says, "Well, the bed's on fire, we better do something." Did you read the story? It's amazing, it just happened. In Brainerd, this last week, was it? A couple weeks ago. And the kid walked away from it with no sign of burns or anything. Well, I think he did have some what do I want to say? It's like veining in his shoulder that you could see. But it's amazing the power of that, and sometimes you can get hit and still walk away from it. The sense of the power of God who is able to create things and at the same time protect us from it. Do you take time to simply wonder about it and think in amazement of who our God is and how great He is? God asks in Job 38:22 this question. He says, "Hast thou entered into the treasures of the snow, or hast thou seen the treasures of hail? I have both as a child and an adult examined. Let the snowflakes fall on my hand and examine each one, trying to see the intricacies of those snowflakes, trying to find even two that look alike, because I didn't used to believe that when all this snow falls, when you get 3 foot of snow around, and to realize that every particle in that snowflake, or snow, every flake has been different and looks different if you look at it. Everyone's different. And I must admit, sometimes in the middle of a hard winter, it's hard to consider treasures or snow a treasure. And yet at the same time, when you got a warm house and good and snug, a good blizzard around the house is kind of fun at times. Made me wish I had a fireplace a lot of times where I could sit before the fireplace and just read a book all day. That would be joy. At the same time, I admit I have yet to enter into the treasury of hail. Now, if any of you have ever entered in and begin to wonder and can see the treasury in hail, please let me know. You know, I cannot understand that. You know, I've grown up most of my life living in farm country, and it's hard to accept that hail, there's something to be treasured about hail. Oh, Amanda has
I
mine.
saw hail earlier this spring that was clear like crystal balls.
Oh,
I've never seen them.
I haven't either. That would be neat to see.
They were hard.
What?
They were hard.
Yeah. Yeah. However, even those words that God says we should enter into the treasure of hail, that's something to wonder about in and of itself. And I bet as I've been talking, some of you, things have popped into your minds about things that you wondered amazement at that happened, either in the Scripture or happen around us. My own feeling as to why is quite simple. In Psalms 19, well, let me go back. My feeling is, in such things as Bible phenomenon, shooting stars, northern lights, it's quite simple. I really think that God sometimes just put them there for us to enjoy. And I think when we try to get too wrapped up in trying to figure out why, we lose the simplicity and that maybe God is just putting them there for us to enjoy. I think at times He intends for us to lose ourselves in that beauty. And then losing ourselves in the beauty that He's presented for us, He's also drawing us closer to Him, the one that made it all. I sometimes picture God painting on the heavenly canvas with the brilliance of the northern lights, painting a picture of His magnificence for all of our benefit. When we lose the childlike ability to wonder, we lose the ability to reach out and touch out God. And I think David, in many of the Psalms, tells us many of those same things and gives us similar conclusions. Things that cause us to stand in awe of a Creator who made such a thing. By the way, have you looked at the back of your bulletin today? That was something Michaela gave me, obvious years and years ago, and gave me, and it was because of a sermon, I think, that I preached about David Lane and looking up in the stars and contemplating God and who He was. Still stands there, is stuck to the side of one of my file cabinets in the basement of the house. Sometimes I see things that literally take my breath away. It's kind of like coming over the top of a roller coaster and losing your stomach on the other side. It's kind of that thrill sometimes when you really stop and think about God. Standing on the rim of the Grand Canyon and looking out and thinking how God could have created something like this. And you know, unlike scientists that make the earth billions of years old, that's the only way you'd have enough time for it to be dug out by water. I understand how water moves things around and stuff. But I look at the Grand Canyon, I think God created this for us to enjoy, to see and to wonder at His power. He used an awful big backloader to lift and do that job. Psalms 19. Verse 1 says, "The heavens are telling the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of His hands." It reminds me of His chorus that I've always loved that begins, "In the stars His handiwork I see. On the winds He speaks with majesty." I don't remember the rest of it. He ruleth over land and sea. What is that to me? Yeah. David used to being outdoors, observe the heavens oftentimes. I'm sure he had seen many shooting stars. Witnessed the power of thunderstorms. We're a lot of times when we witness that, we're in a tent or in a house. David was in a tent. There's a big difference between the two. I've been in a tent in a rainstorm and it wasn't fun, especially with two young kids that wanted to reach up and brush the insides of the tent and then have the water run down their arms. And, yeah, my son denies it. But I think sometimes we just simply lose that childlike ability to wonder. David understood it so well. And that's the subject he speaks about in the rest of chapter 19, especially verses 2 through 4. He talks about everything God has created and everything declaring the work of God's hands. And he goes on to say, day to day pours forth speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their utterances to the end of the world. And then he has placed a tent for the sun. Basically, he's talking about everything that God has created and what it does in nature. They speak to us to impart knowledge. No voice, but everyone in the world has heard their voice in witness of God and who he is. Especially if we've taken the time to wonder about it. They've been given, I think, for us to learn to stand in awe before such a God. The psalmist in Psalms 97 again speaks of the magnificence of nature in revealing God. And he finishes that first part, it's in verse 6, with these words. He says, the heavens declare his righteousness, and all the people have seen his glory. So I think God has given us all things, the amazing stories of faith and miracles, and power and beauty in nature to cause us to wonder about God, his power, his magnificence, and to be drawn closer to him as we meditate on him and what he has given to us. And these things, I think, should also bring results in our own lives. And part of that result is Psalm 97. I'm just going to read verses 7, 9, and 12. It says, let all those be ashamed who serve graven images, who boast themselves of idols. Worship him, all you gods, for thou art the Lord most high over all the earth. Thou art exalted far above all gods. Be glad in the Lord, you righteous ones, and give thanks to his holy name. I think these things should cause us to be ashamed of some of the petty things that we set up as gods in our lives. And all of us do it. All those unimportant things can easily rob God of our time and our energies and our efforts. Amaze us, these things should, with wonder, so that we catch a sight of who God really is, that we might turn and worship him only. I think it's also given to cause us to give thanks to God for everything that we see, for drawing us to him. What else have you ever seen that can compare to God and the magnificence of the world that he's created? I think like children, we need to forget the scientific facts and times and just stand amazed in wonderment of the things of God. When we forget the wonder of it all, we begin to miss that beautiful sense of who God is and the thing God wants to do to show us his grace and his love and his greatness. And we can oftentimes lose track of his magnificence and the busyness that surrounds us. Have you entered into the treasures of the snow, the hail, the shooting stars, the northern lights, the magnificent, unexplainable Bible stories? Have you learned to stand and wonder and just contemplate God as he reveals himself to you?